Hey, Star Wars fans and Rule the Galaxy fans. Guess what? It's opening day. If you have a
Is it?
major league, it is. If you got a major league baseball team, mine is the Cubs. If you are a fan of a team, go celebrate today's opening day. It is Joe in the pilot seat. I was
Oh, that's right. It is.
out of commission, out of the realm last night when the Rule of the Galaxy squad got a chance to interview Miss Emily Swallow, the armorer from The Mandalorian. And wow, what a show that was. It's now out there, not only on YouTube, but also on our podcast, any podcast platform of choice. We're on it. So go check that out. But remember, subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us, like us. Everything you got to do, smash that like button, as the YouTubers say.
Yes, we need to start doing that way more often,
Yes.
especially at this point in the juncture when people are watching. Guys, if you like what we're doing, hit that like button. It changes the algorithm. It let YouTube know that people like us. Share the word and share it. So like and share, do
Yep.
all that stuff. Subscribe to us. The more we can get, the more content we can bring you guys. Um,
Exactly.
yes.
Hey, Adam Parker. Hey, Alfie. Nice to see you guys hopping in there. Always good to see Adam Parker. Alfie is not here tonight, so look, gosh, it's some
Do
serious
you
Riz
know? Do you
execution.
know the Riz? Do you know the Riz?
Do I?
Do you
I've
have
heard
the
you
do
guys
you
talk
have
about the
Riz?
Riz.
Oh, so you heard about the
It's
Riz?
the charisma, right?
Yeah, well, see, like I guess that's look, the kids these days don't know what the word charisma means, but it's so there's also another one that's fun called Giat, right? So
Uh huh.
basically it's junk in the trunk. It's the 2024 version of junk in the trunk. So if you're shaking your Giat for the Rizzler,
Wow.
yeah, you gotta have the Riz. You gotta come with the Riz.
Okay. All right. Well, so Brent
It's
and I are
not
here.
Rizzo. It's not Anthony Rizzo who's playing for the Yankees
Yeah, he is.
and
And
not
my
the
dog is
Cubs.
named Rizzo after Anthony Rizzo. Um, but um, but yeah, that lovely voice, those dulcet tones you hear with me
Oh,
is Mr.
dulcet tones.
Brent Dykman. And he is here. I was going to introduce him, but he introduced himself. And yes, we are waiting on special guest Claudia Gray. At least it is scheduled. We are planned to be here. So I am waiting to hear back and make sure that everything's functioning and going well on that. But in the meantime, it didn't hurt for Brent and I to come on and just talk a little wars. It was great to listen to again the Emily Swallow show from last night because I got to hear how D-Doc said I'm a conversationalist when I stayed at his house. That was fun. It was great to meet the Doc
Okay.
children. Yeah,
Okay. Let's okay, so you do keep a conversation going.
I
But
do.
I we have to let the listeners in, and I tried to as well. The amount of energy that comes off of Joseph Marinera, as our friend calls him, but like you have listeners like you really have no idea. He is 50s.
52.
Okay, so he's
Yep.
50 with the energy of an 8-year-old.
Yeah, I appreciate
And
that, man.
about I mean, like, you just keep moving. We've done trivia for like 6 months now. And like, I come home and I can't calm down for like 3 hours because of the energy that I feed from you sitting next to me.
Well, I appreciate that.
The
I
man
like
will get up and shake his bonbon while we're doing trivia because he's got music playing in between.
it. It is true. I'm a little energetic. I really have a hard time slowing down. So for those of you who've either met me at ICCC or one of the conventions or something, you'll see I don't stop. It's just something in me. I can't stop. My wife knows that. She knows that I'm going 100 miles per hour at all times, and that's okay. Everybody's wired a little bit differently. So yeah. While some people partake in certain things to get them to this level, I don't need that.
Yeah,
So
I couldn't imagine you on any of those things. Like that would just be an extra level. Like you're already 11, you're already on 11
yeah,
because 11's louder than 10, but
of
you would
course.
be at like 15.
So thank you. I appreciate it. Well, that's enough of Joe's energy level because we could go on that for all night. But I got a great experience yesterday. My son, the reason I missed is I was up in Chicago. My son got a chance to go to batting practice. He was in batting practice for the Cubs. With the well, I wouldn't say the Cubs on Wrigley Field. I got a chance to go up there and be with him, video everything. He's putting videos about that and everything. So it's really just it was a fabulous experience, and to be walking around on Wrigley Field, and some professional photographers took pictures of Joey and I just hanging out on the field and in the dugout. It really was a cool experience to have. One of those pinch me moments. So I hated that I missed the Armorer show, but I had to go do that with my son, and I won't regret that. It was a lot of fun, but we haven't gotten a chance to talk about a lot of things. I haven't with you guys because I know last week, as D-Doc said, I was heading to New York, Philly and New York. You were at Disney. Alfie was under the weather, so it would have been D-Doc by himself, which he did not want to do a show by himself last week. So we missed last week, but this week we're doubling up and giving you a little bonus show. But Brent, you and I have not gotten a chance to talk a little bit about the Bad Batch, and you know, I I personally, I know we all wanted to get to that end result thing, that Alfie has talked about a lot, that big battle at the end, and seeing if the clones can all get out, and if there's a stormtrooper clone battle. I've enjoyed getting reconnected with Finnick. I really have enjoyed getting reconnected with our friend of the show, Nika Futterman, also the one, well, right now, the one and only Asajj Ventress. I thought that was great to see her come back in. But I think in the long run, both those shows are going to play for a purpose. And I think that purpose might be they have something to do with the end of the series. And then maybe they're involved with the next animated series that's going to come out.
I
My,
mean,
my thoughts.
yeah, I mean, that's where Alfie is saying is he said like his biggest problem is that we spent 2 episodes setting up the next series and not worrying about where this series is going. Whereas I don't know if it's just setting up that series because there are certain things, right? So I come at it from I'm watching it as if I don't know anything,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you watch it as if you don't know anything, there needs to be answers that are explained and talked about, right? So you need to explain midichlorians and M count and what that means and what a Jedi like. It does that mean that you have force powers? So they explained that for the first time that that's where that was going. Now, for well, let's say that we're gonna for 80% of the fans, they're saying that that's a waste of the time. But there's that 20% that didn't know that information, right?
Yeah.
Like and then there's also the 80% of the fans that are going to have the problem with not explaining where Asajj came from or how Asajj is there. Again, that's for the 80% of the fans. They're gonna want that answer. And our guy who writes the show, who is the executive producer, has said in podcasts, in media, that not every Star Wars story needs to be told. However, with her leaving and looking back over her shoulder and saying, I have more lives,
Mm-hmm.
which I think I saw somewhere on social media that says, what is she, a cat now? And so, yeah, I get, I like, how can you not, right? They're leading you towards that. But does that mean that we're going to get that story soon? Who knows, right? And I sooner rather than later, later rather than sooner. But yeah, I feel like it is leading towards that, and some people think that this is going nowhere. But I look, like I said, I kind of come from it from like I'm letting you tell your story, and if you look at it in the scheme of the story as not the story of the old Bad Batch and not trying to foreshadow where we're going
Mm-hmm.
forward, going piece by piece, you those nuggets from season 3, you need to know those nuggets to help you understand what's going on with Necromancer. Now, if you are a super fan, I think you're already making those inferences, right? So the super fans have already they're jumped to episode 12 when there are people that they still need to drag along through to get to episode 12 and 13 for it to have the impact.
Well, I have a couple thoughts on the whole Dark Disciple leading into this and then going from here with the multiple lives. One, Mark Newbold, friend of the show, StarWars.com, Star Wars Insider, says, the amount of people who read the books and the comics is minuscule
Yeah.
compared to people who watch the shows, who is even minuscule compared to the people who watch the movies, right?
Right.
So if you need to make some changes in that background, you can do that. It's hard to make them in the movies, but you can at least do it in the books, the comics, and sometimes even in the animated series. So a lot of people aren't going to realize even what's going on. You know, the Duchess, Jessica, she put on Twitter, you know, how many people even know about Dark Disciple? I mean, which, let's face it, it's one of my favorite new books. How many people know about that? But then a lot of people, the last time they saw Asajj Ventress was in the Clone Wars, right? In season what, 5? I don't think she wasn't in season 6 or season 7. So they saw her in Clone Wars season 5. Maybe some people saw her in or read about her in Dark Disciple, but other than that, they have no reason to not know why she's there now. And then there's so many new fans who are just like, cool, who's this new character that's in this new show that's leading, it's between Revenge of the Sith and Star Wars. So there's a lot of stuff going on there and a lot of pieces. But let's think about it. Darth Maul basically died, came back, right? Savage Opress basically died, came back. Mother Talzin brought back an entire legion of ghosts, people from that planet, the ones you're making the trees for, to go fight against uh, Count Dooku. So there is some revitalization of life in that species, I guess you would say. So, nothing's too far off base on this, but I mean, really, besides the super fans like us, it's not that big of a deal. People will go, "Oh, Asajj Ventress. I've heard of her before. She's back." Okay.
I think the people that are looking for it to be a big deal are going to find it to be a big deal.
Yeah.
The people that are looking for this to be just another nail in the coffin, and if you don't explain it, they're just going to be like, "Oh, that's another reason why I should give up on the franchise." So that's my read on it, is the people that are looking for it to be a negative will find it as a negative. And then in the world and social media, those might be the ones that are the most vocal. So if you watch the social media threads, people are going to be vocal about it for the next couple months just because they can be.
Right.
And the people that are okay with it and are just watching it are staying silent and just watching it. So that's the world that we live in. It's the beautiful thing of being in touch all the time.
Yeah, we don't because we run a podcast, we do pay attention to all these different things. But
Right.
let's face it, majority of people go see the
Right.
movies. Some of them watch the shows. Some of them watch the animated series. Very few read the comics. Some read the books. That's
I
kind of how it
mean,
works.
I have several friends that I work with that I have found out just through conversation that are Star Wars fans. We talked about Andor in depth. We talk about the live action. I ask them what's going on with Bad Batch. What do you think about Bad Batch? What? I don't even know about. Right. So like not everything. And I was watching something else. So right. So I play my miniature games, but I watch a lot of other miniature games, and they were talking about the lore of the 40K universe. And one guy was like, "Yeah, I was a huge Star Wars fan, but I've kind of checked out a little bit just because of one. There's like a lot of there's a lot of content that's being pushed out right now,
Right.
and now I can pick and choose what like." In the past, if you would ask me if there's a Star Wars movie I'm going, I probably would have said yes. But in the last 5 years, I'm going to be a little bit more choosy. And I feel like I can be a little bit more choosy just because the amount of content's there. So some people will take that as, see, what are they doing to the fan base? But at the same point, they're also providing you with so much content to where you can pick and choose what you want to go to. It's almost like,
Yep.
I don't know. It's like the DC universe and the visual universe, right? Not everybody loves the DC visual universe. They love the DC comics, but they don't necessarily love the DC visual stuff. So they pick and choose what they go to based upon
Yep.
who is their favorite or what story brings it out. So fandoms go through this. I think we're just
Yeah.
there now because a lot of it is like, are we oversaturated with Star Wars stuff? Possibly.
Well, one, as I'm seeing more people are following, listening, watching, all that kind of stuff, and I'm seeing some comments sent our way. Yes, we are hoping that Claudia does show up. Claudia was scheduled for this time frame, so we'll see here. We'll give her a little bit more time to see if she makes it. I'm sure there's probably a conflict or something like that, so we'll wait and see what happens. But in the meantime, Brent and I will talk this up and go over this stuff. Look, you some of it might even be, let's think about this. We're talking about DC and Marvel, right? Compared to like Star Wars and the fandoms and what gets overblown, what gets the most views, most everything like that. Um, I would say sometimes it starts where the story started, and Star Wars started in the movie theaters,
Hmm.
and then spawned off to books, comics, things, TV series, animated series. You know, people were reading about Superman in comic books in the 30s or 40s,
Right.
right? Batman, the same thing. So it started there. So that amount of people who are dedicated to the comics and then to the
Hmm.
TV series is going to be much higher than maybe the people who are dedicated to the movie series because that's their Batman or that's their
Hmm.
Superman or what have you. While Star Wars, on the other hand, I think it's just the opposite. Like you said, most people you can go into your workplace and you can say, "Hey, you a Star Wars fan? Oh yeah, I love the last one that came out. What? Ahsoka? What is that? The Bad Batch? No idea. Oh, Rise of Skywalker? Oh yeah, that was good. I liked it. That was fun, right?" And you're like, okay, so it's based off the movies instead of
Hmm.
those other things. So I think you're right. It's a genre. It's where it started. All those kind of things. So when it comes to Bad Batch, look, I've said I'm not sure the Bad Batch characters are the key of this series. They're more of the conduit or the vehicle to get us between those things, right? But Omega probably is, right? Some of these other characters are. Mount Tantus probably is a little bit more deeper, but you have to have that connecting thread that gets you there, and the Bad Batch does that.
So I'm going to ask you a question that I'm thinking of that just kind of dawned on me with your talking. A lot of people say that the original trilogy is R2D2's interpretation of the events that he saw.
Right.
Right? And so everything has a storyteller. Everybody has a narrator. There is
Hmm.
a voice. Every story, it doesn't matter. I mean, something that we could talk to Claudia if she does chime in here. Everyone has there's a vehicle that the story's told through and through their perspective. Is Omega the vehicle for the Bad Batch?
I think
Is
it.
it through Omega's experience?
I think whether it's through her experience or not, I think we went into the Clone Wars series thinking we're going to expand on Anakin, Obi Wan, Padme, the Emperor, right?
Hmm.
When really, by the time you got to the end, it was Ahsoka's series.
Right. And if you remember the first probably 3 years of that
Oh
series,
yeah.
everyone went in expecting it to be this expansion of these wonderful fights and all of this Clone
Yep.
War stuff, and they absolutely despised Ahsoka Tano. They
Correct.
were like, "Why is this person here? Who is she? She has no point to be here." But because they gave that time and breadth, from what I've heard, like I didn't even get into it at the
Yeah.
time, but I hear people talk about it, and I know that she's gone through this change, right? So that story, like the Clone Wars, now we're talking what 12 years, 13 years after it actually started. The Clone Wars is a story,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And as you can see where we're going with that. So
I
what,
I
like,
uh, I would
so
say
when
it's
we,
it's a good thought that this is going to be um Omega's by the time we get to the end of season 4 right here, or 3, sorry, 3. By the time we get to the end of this, there's a good chance all the Bad Batch members are going to be gone. She might be the last one standing of that group, and we don't know where that story is going to be except that her body, her blood can handle the M count, right? So there is that continuing line. There is that story, that thread that goes all the way to now the Mandalorian, right, where they're talking about M count, and then
well, it goes to Snoke as well
it
because
goes
she
all the
saw
way
the
to
pickle cut, right?
correct, goes all the way through to the sequel trilogy. So, and then it goes through to Ray because Ray was a clone of a clone of a, or a descendant
She
of
was
a
a
clone of
child
a,
of a clone, right? Like
correct.
she wasn't necessarily cloned off of her father.
Correct. So I think just as that one was Ahsoka, this one probably will end up being the Omega story told through the path that we have to with the characters we have. Um,
Well, I don't know. There's two things about that. One, I don't know if we're going to give it enough time, and I don't know if people are going to give it enough time to let it do that. Right? It took 10 years to get it to be Ahsoka being who she is right now.
yeah,
Right? So it took time. So I don't know if we as fans are gonna allow that time to breathe, to allow it to develop, because we want everything right now, and we also want the stories to be thought out and telegraphed all the way to the end, right? Like because of the to me, it's the Marvel Cinematic Universe effect. Like we think because there's this 22 Infinity Stone arc that they made
Correct.
22 movies around, that absolutely everything that has series, you should have all beats set for the entirety of the series and not let each chapter play out. And then the other thing is, I think much the same as the Clone Wars, where people were getting a little cheesed off because it wasn't Anakin and Obi, and it wasn't all of these cool battles, and it was this Sky Guy coming in and bothering things. I think people were expecting more because it's called the Bad Batch. They were expecting it to be more Bad Batchery, right? I mean, I know that's
Right.
some of Alfie's gripe on it too, but they're going through this growth arc of like moving out of being war and going into protective mode. So
It's we'll see where it goes. I mean, I'm as I heard Alfie say in yesterday's show, he's excited about the Acolyte. He's interested. Look, I personally, with every Star Wars thing that comes out, I go into it with an open mind. I go into it with not high expectations, but a high level of hope that it's going to be good, constructive, move the story along Star Wars.
so
I don't think that it has to be the be all of everything. I just want it to be something that, as you say, entertains me and that moves the story along. That's what I want.
so when so this is where I have the whole comment filler and people making filler, and when I make fun of anything. Whenever somebody says filler, I, I just automatically, I don't understand that concept, and I don't understand, and this is how dense I am. When you say I want the story to move along, what story are you talking about? Because I hear fans use that as a justification for whether they like something or not. Like one of the first things I saw about Guardians of the Galaxy 3 was like it was a fun movie, but it didn't move the overall story forward. What story are you talking about with Guardians of the Galaxy 3? Like, right? What
Yeah.
story were you expecting to be moving along? So when
For
you say that you wanted to move the story along, what story are we talking about?
I, the story I want, the key to the story that I want is connectivity. I want it to make sense. There were times in the sequel trilogy where I didn't feel like the connectivity was there. I was fine. They moved the story somewhere, right? It just didn't like it felt like it was like a movie, a movie, a movie instead of a trilogy of movies. I really wanted them to be like, I end this one, we start the next one, and it has all the connectivity I need. Doesn't have to be the same story, whatever. Just needs the connectivity. So I leave and I'm going, I know where we are. I know what we're doing. This makes sense where it's going, right? So
So
for the
so
comics, I just want it to be for the comics. From the animated, I want anything that happens, Rebels, Bad Batch, things like that, between 3 and 4. I just want to be able to look and go, okay, that all makes sense. It works. It happened between those two. That's what I want to see.
so when you're saying connectivity, I think Clone Wars, and I think everything from the first 3 seasons of Clone Wars blows that story out of the water because there was no connectivity between. If you watched it in timeline order as it was being released,
Oh, I agree. That's one of the reasons when I first started watching Clone Wars, I was like, why are we hopping around? What is this? Where this wasn't in last week's story, right? It wasn't until I sat down and did it in the chronological order. Once I watched it in chronological order, I went, okay, this all makes this is much better for me now. I First of all, I didn't know, because I was busy raising 3 kids. I was busy working 2 jobs.
sure.
For me to watch an animated series during that time frame, I was like, I'll catch what I can, but I have a feeling it's for more for a kid level. But when I would catch it, I would sit there and go, where is this? Where does this make sense? And it wasn't until COVID, it wasn't
Okay.
until 2020
See, no, I
when
didn't
they
realize
put
that.
it.
I thought you
No,
were a
no,
long time. Like I
no,
thought
no.
you like so. Like I would put Alfie in that. I feel like Alfie watched it.
He probably did, but I did not. I sat there and went, you know, look at this, Joe. Thank
I
you.
saw it. I saw it
Hyperspace.
come up.
I am very relaxed. I'm very chill because I was very nervous for Claudia to be here, and with her not here, I'm just kind of chilling. Yeah, that's what's going on, Hyperspace Heroes. Um, but yeah, it was honestly Clone Wars. COVID hit right after Joey and I started this show.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I'm going to reacquaint myself with everything. And then, oh, by the way, I've got 6 months to do that in. So guess what? I'm really going to reacquaint. And then I thought, this didn't really make a ton of sense to me when I first watched some of it. So I'm going to do it the way it's supposed to be done. And that's what I did. I went back and I watched it in that order. And I went, oh, okay. This feeds the this moves the story along. Like it makes it going from Attack of the Clones to Revenge of the Sith much better, in my opinion, when you watch it in that follow along order. That's my opinion. Back in 2008 or whatever, it was not making sense to me. There we go. A lot of life going on when Clone Wars. Thank you, thank
But
you.
listen to like so because of how much you guys remember about it and how much because I watched at the same time, but I still just
Sure,
I it just and again it comes back to I am not a prequel fan for whatever reason. It like I like Star Wars. I'm not one of the ones that like prior to the sequels coming out, I wasn't one of the ones that was like, what are your favorite Star Wars movie? And there is a right
right.
answer, right? Because they were saying you should hate the prequels and like you can't like the prequels. I was like, no, I love them and I love Jar Jar Binks, right?
Hmm.
Because I was entertained. I liked the character. I liked what he did. Um, I liked the overall. I will say it, and I've said it before. I didn't necessarily like the acting choices that Hayden made,
Sure,
and he never really became Vader or Anakin to me until I saw him in Ahsoka. The Ahsoka, he came back, and
that's awesome.
I don't know if it's because I've watched the Clone Wars and seen him, and I feel like he was more the Anakin from the Clone Wars than he was making those choices that he was making during Revenge of the Sith and like the two other movies.
That's awesome.
But like I think he grew on me as a character with that 2 episode piece in Ahsoka.
And I'm hoping we see more of that. I'm not gonna lie. I hope that keeps happening, even if it's for a minute or two per episode, a flashback, a video. She was watching Hollows, as she said. So yeah. So again, just to let everybody know, Brent and I are doing this impromptu because we were scheduled to be with Claudia Gray. I apologize for putting that out there. It doesn't, as we're a half an hour in or more, it doesn't look like she's going to be here. That's okay.
Right.
We'll reschedule. I'll get with her people and make sure it happens because Brent, I'm going to throw this out there real quick. We've talked a little bit about
You want to
everything.
talk some Claudia Gray?
Yeah.
Let's
Let's do
talk
it.
about the stuff that we know and what we were gonna
Yeah.
ask and what we were hoping to hear about.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously we had some very general and open-ended questions for her to explain her career, her background, her motivations, all those kind of things, which I think we were all looking forward to. But some things that stand out to me is, you know, Lost Stars. I mean, you talk about some of the books that Claudia Gray has done recently for Star Wars fans, and yes, I've read one of her High Republic books, but not. I think she's done two or three. But between Lost Stars, Bloodline, Leia, and Master and Apprentice, those four books right there alone, that's high quality Star Wars, great, great characters. Um, thank you, Brown leader. We're letting the hair down for a few, yes. But those stories right there were deep. I think they felt like we always say it. It felt like Star Wars. Sometimes you read something or watch something and you go, I mean, that was cool, but did it make you feel like you were in Star Wars? And all four of these books make you feel like you were entrenched in the Star Wars realm. Would you agree? I mean, we both did them on audiobook, but
Well, yeah, I mean, let's be honest. Like, read what?
right,
I
exactly.
told you it's in a book, right? Like if it's in a book, I'm not sure that I'm gonna know any of that lore. It's not something that I've been absorbed.
Sure,
Which is
sure.
also kind of funny too, because I was listening to that 40K podcast that they were talking, and
Hmm.
they were talking because a lot of 40K, and yes, it's a game, but it's all set in the 41st millennium, yada yada yada. They also print books out. So if you want to talk about like there are probably 300 to 400 40K books that the guys that play the game
Mm.
really dive into and really digest and love And they've even said that some of the authors that write the books contradict themselves along the way 3
Wow.
to 4 times. Like in their first book, they write X and people believe it, but then in book 3, in their own book, they will contradict what they said in book 1 often, right? So
Wow.
they try to like there's continuity errors all throughout that
Don't try that
fandom.
with Star Wars fans.
I mean, right? Like, so, well, the reason why I'm saying is that it happens, but like to go in the parallel from what's going on, the one that I think I've listened to actually like 2 or 3 times is Lost Stars. And
Mhm.
that book, yes, it's written for teens. Yes, there is a love story that is written in there, but it has everything that I love,
Yep.
right? So the reason why everything that I'm looking for a new idea that feels like it's in the same spot,
Correct.
right? You brought in 2 completely unknown characters,
Yep. Sienna
Thane,
Ree and Thane Kyrell.
Thane Kyrell and Sienna Ree, and they wanted to be Imperial pilots. They were in the Imperial Academy together. So you want to like I want to know these types of things about how it happens. It's a cutthroat world, and Thane Kyrie was like, "Screw you guys, I'm out."
Right.
And Sierra was like, "No, this is my way of getting out of the level, or this is my way of getting out of where I was at. It's my way to change my stars." And Thane was like, "Dude, I can't take it because he was the victim of the
Mhm.
sabotage and the backhanded, and he didn't like it. So they don't see each other for a while, and I think it's awesome that they pull in the Battle of Hoth.
Oh, fantastic.
She's watching hollows of the Battle of Hoth to see what went right and what went wrong,
And
and
those are 10.
she's like, I know that maneuver. We've done that maneuver together. I know he's alive.
Yep.
And like you're taking you're taking the original trilogy and you're taking a completely different group of individuals that are affected by that world, and you're
Yep.
telling me a completely new story within the world that's there. And I go back to kind of what I was talking to Ryan McGee about, why I like the Bad Batch, why I like Andor, why I liked Rebels, because these are all stories that are taking place within that window,
Yep.
and they're different people, but you know that these are happening between this window, and you know that they're made up. Yeah, right, it's stories, but like you can feel that they're there within that world, and there is a realness to them. So like that's why I love Lost Stars. Like
Me too.
she was on a Star Destroyer when the Death Star 1 blew up,
Yep.
watching it, seeing the Falcon and an X-wing fly away.
Yep.
Like I mean, like, and then she's on the Battle of Hoth, and like so they tie in their love story, they tie in their training and all of that stuff with
100%.
absolutely everything that's gone on in the original trilogy. And it's just another, it's like what our old friend Vinny would say, right? What's actually going on the Death Star? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, you murdered millions of people that were just cooking. They were just
Yeah.
cooks. They didn't do anything. They didn't do anything wrong. They were just cooking food for the rest of
Janitorial services, man.
Right, right. I mean, Kylo was the janitorial services on Undercover Boss.
Well, so I think you're right. I mean, Lost Stars hit it in all things, and it made, if you're an original trilogy fan and you didn't go back, if you're my age and you're like, oh, that's young kid stuff, I'm not gonna do it, you missed out. Nick and I even did a whole episode as a book review on Lost Stars on here years ago. You can go back and you can go listen to. We did a book review on this.
That was back in the alliteration days of the
Yeah.
Lothal library of like what
Oh,
episode?
man.
Probably like 27,
Yes.
32.
Yes. So I mean, go check that out. And you're right. It hits all the right points. I think another one that hits all the right points is Bloodline, because it's showing the precursor of the Resistance being born, right? And thank you, Alfie, for staying in, saying hey. So I think one of the things that I thought was so cool were things that I thought about. Ben Solo was off at that time with Luke, if I'm not mistaken, and Luke wasn't in this book. But Ben Solo, when Leia finds out, when all the political hubbub goes on, they find out that Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker, was her father.
Mm-hmm.
She was like, "Well, Ben's out in hyperspace, whatever. He's going to have to find this out when they come back to real space, right?" Like she couldn't even tell him he was going to find that. So thinking about how Kylo Ren, who was at that time Ben Solo, found out that his mom was the daughter of Darth Vader is just such a key part of that book. And then I think the other thing is there were some really great characters. Her staffer slash pilot, Greer Sennell, I believe she was the darker skinned lady who was on Hazian Prime that got blown
The
up.
one that, yeah, looking
She
back
looked
at
up.
the
Um,
Star Killer bolts.
yep, and then the senator, who I thought was a great character, and I know you probably Ransom Casterfo. I thought,
He was the one that was all against her, right? Like
yeah,
he was the
yeah,
one that was like trying to unseat her when she found out, like, how can we trust her if she's
yep.
related to Vader? She's gonna all she's trying to do is be like a wolf in sheep's clothing.
I mean, just fantastic. I thought two really great characters that she laid into the book, and then laying in the beginning of the Resistance, which it showed the beginning of the Resistance right then and
Right,
there at the end of the book,
right.
and then to also show that Ben found out about Darth Vader and Anakin Skywalker this way. I thought all that tied in so well in that book. I thought it was just a great book. So,
So, on from my perspective, really the only big takeaway, like, I read it. I'm sorry, I
hmm
listened to it, and it could be because I was mowing the yard and driving the kids around, and I didn't necessarily absorb everything. But the big storyline that I remember absorbing was the Hut Slayer,
oh
and they like calling her
yes,
Hut, finding out through the hollows, and that
yes,
she became
for God,
this race. Yeah, this race was like would do anything that she said
man,
because she was the Hut Slayer. And so, I mean, that was basically one of my
that was.
takeaways, aside from the fact that, like, it shows the political. So if you're into
hmm
like that political aspirations, there was that political theater, that undermining, again, the backstabbing, and like how
Yeah,
everyone's like the new republic should be a good republic, but then they realize that people are still trying to find power and fight for power and do things to keep power.
the thing with the Leia, the other ones I've all read multiple times. Bloodline, Lost Stars, and Master and Apprentice. Leia's the only one I only read once
Hmm.
or listened to once. I did think though between Tarkin being in there, Mon Mothma being involved, and then Holdo, those were things that stood out to me that were in that book, right? That they were all involved with that book. That's what stood out to me. But
So that's
yeah,
one that I didn't necessarily fall into, right? That's
okay.
not one that would fell into my download pile. I did download Master and Apprentice.
Well, yeah,
Um,
let's hit that one because that was again one of those ones.
so
Anytime you add Obi-Wan or Qui-Gon, it's a must listen or see.
right, and so I guess it was just interesting. Like, reading it didn't really set, like, again, it's a prequel trilogy. It's not something that I truly am passionately attached to. Um, I didn't necessarily understand the conflict that they were involved in at the time. So why was that such a big deal? But it was showing you how Qui Gon.
hmm
It showed how Qui Gon trained Obi Wan, and kind of the way that Obi Wan would then subsequently gives reason to the behind the scenes of why Obi Wan trained Anakin the way that he did. But it also gave you more insight into the way that Dooku trained Qui Gon,
Correct.
and a little bit more of the Qui Gon's background. And what is his name? Rael Aberoth.
Rael Averross, yes.
And she probably has one of my favorite Star Wars lines in this book, Claudia Gray. I believe it was a Qui-Gon. It was either Rail or Qui-Gon, and it was towards the end. And it was all about, basically, he was saying, because Rail starts to turn dark, and
Yep.
Qui-Gon is like, you know what? It's a constant choice. And I'm gonna paraphrase it, but I think you know what I'm talking about. It's a
Yes.
constant choice. It's a constant battle of being light and dark, and I choose the light. Right? It's not like, so that was a way to think about the Force in a way that I never thought. I thought, you like, up until that point, yes, 40 some years of watching the movies, watching TV shows, probably even 6 to 9 months of being on the podcast talking about Star Wars, I was finally hit with this idea that light side can tap into the dark side,
Yep.
but they choose the light, right? Like, so it's a choice, it's a constant battle, it's a
It did.
constant
Yep.
pull, it's a constant swing, and I choose to be on the right side or on the light side. I don't choose to be on the dark side, which kind
I'm
of makes it interesting to think about Anakin at that point too, right? Like,
Oh, oh yeah.
why did you choose the dark side so hard when you did? Well, I guess
Right.
because
Why not?
you felt like you had to betray the master because he was going to kill you, right? I feel like if you
Correct.
didn't, you're going to be killed. But like, if it really is a choice, why are people so persuaded
No, I
to fall to
agree.
that?
I think Rail was one of the best characters written in a book that in a while. I thought his character was awesome, and I think you're right. I think even Luke and Yoda both at different times have mentioned choosing the light. We have the dark in us. We can easily fall into the darkness, right? But you have to make that choice, and you constantly have to make that choice. It's
And
easy, right?
y-
It's easier, as Yoda would say.
right, and I guess they did talk about it on the Death Star when he was
No,
talking.
no, you're right.
But it's like something that I don't know. The way that it was worded in that book made it dawn on me that like it's a constant battle, and like you can tap into it. And I think we've even had conversations about it where Obi-Wan, when
Mhm.
he did his high flip, uh, force pull and slice Darth Maul in half. That maybe that was from rage or fear from death, and he tapped into the dark side to be able to do that move.
Correct. Correct.
Um, so
No, I agree. I agree. And honestly, I'm going to keep. We've been going for almost an hour, so I'm good. We're going to shut it down here in a minute. But I just want to do. You and I having a quick conversation with Claudia not here. I thought it'd be fun, and I'm glad we covered these things because hopefully we'll be ready and prepared even more when we do have her on and when she can be with us. But a reminder to the listeners and followers, just a scheduling conflict. It looks like so. It's just Brent and I shooting it from the hip tonight, but. I'm glad that um, I'm glad one Acolyte's coming out, open arms, ready to go. Two, I'm perfectly happy.
come to you with open arms.
Oh, I'm usually the one that
I
sings, and I
know, but
see
like
why
I
now.
was
God,
watching I was watching some YouTube show today, and it was all about that song and how Steven Tyler hated it, but then when he heard it live and people reacted to it, it became one of his favorites. But
oh
I've
my God.
come
Oh,
to
Stephen Perry.
you.
Stephen
Yeah, Stephen
Perry.
Perry. Sorry, not
Yeah,
Steven Tyler. Stephen
I
Perry.
say Aerosmith. That would have been wild
Yeah,
to hear them
Journey.
do.
I had the wrong guy. I'm
Um,
not a rock historian here, people.
That's all right. I'm glad Bad Batch will figure itself out, and if nothing else, if it doesn't give us that final climactic thing we want, it's going to lead to another series. I think we'll see where that goes, but at least I think we're getting quality episodes. And yes, it was great to see Asajj back in the swing of things. We'll see where that goes.
I just wish she was a better teacher.
Okay,
Coming from the education world, like I mean,
it's Asajj.
having somebody balance on one leg with an apple on their head. I mean, it's at least like Yoda had him on upside down doing
Right.
a handstand trying to lift rocks, right? Like, I mean, I, like really,
Maybe next
really.
episode. Maybe
And you
that's
know
oh
the second challenge she gave her had absolutely nothing to do with the Force. It had everything to do with getting her away so she could have it out with the Bad Batch and basically explain herself. Had nothing to do with teaching her the Force.
hey
And then
hey
go
Brent,
ahead.
we've got a guest.
Do we have a guest?
Oh,
Hi.
Well,
hi.
hello.
Claudia, so good to see you. And actually, I think we had some timing issues. Hopefully, you got the right information. So we've been going for a little while. So we're live on air right now.
I'm sorry.
So
I was told it was on the hour. Was I
I,
wrong?
it
so,
was on the
so are
last
you
one.
right? So my next question to you is: are you Central Time Zone by any chance?
Yes. Is that what happened?
So we're Eastern Time Zone.
Yeah.
We've had it happen to one of our other guests. So
Okay. I'm very sorry.
yeah, you're all good.
I had it all blocked out. I thought I was doing so well.
No,
That's
you're good.
you're doing fine by your standards. You're doing very well. You were
Yeah,
right on
you're
time.
right on time. It's perfect.
And actually,
We even got about a good half-hour talk about some of the questions and some of the books that we were going to talk to you
yeah,
about.
yeah.
Oh,
So
okay. All right.
so
Fantastic.
so Claudia, it's great to have you here. I'm Joe. This is Brent. We are two of the regular co-hosts of the show. Some of our other co-hosts couldn't make it tonight. And sorry, and all of a sudden my dogs are going nuts in the background.
There is
Um,
no guarantee that my dog Peaches will not become
Ooh,
aware that other dogs exist at any
okay.
moment and go nuts.
And so,
Well,
what kind
yeah.
of dog is Peaches? Now that I'm picturing a little tiny dog. If you say
She's
Peaches,
small. She's at least part Lhasa Apso. We'll never
okay,
know for sure. We adopted her, but
okay.
she believes that she is very,
Oh yeah,
very mighty.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. She's 10 feet, 10 times the size of what she actually is.
Uh-huh.
So he went to go kind of take care of his dogs, but I'll give you a chance. Like, tell us about you. Tell us about like what do you got? What are you working on? Is there anything you like? How can we find you? What is your all of that jazz? Let's
All right.
if you will.
Hi, I am Claudia Gray. I have written a number of novels, mostly fantasy and science fiction, several of which have been aimed at young adult audiences. I've also done some graphic novels for DC. I write the Darcy and Tilney Mystery series for adults if you want a Jane Austen Agatha Christie mashup. And I am here because I have written, is it 6 Star Wars
Something like
novels?
Yep.
something like
7?
that. I mean, you
Some
just keep
number of Star Wars novels.
you keep popping them out, man.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Well, we do appreciate it, and sorry for all the confusion and everything. And Brent, I probably need to tweet out there that hey, Claudia has joined us. So
Yeah.
we because I just sat in there and I said, hey, we might have to reschedule with Claudia. So while we're doing this live, I'm just going to say, hey,
So
Claudia's here.
while he's
Go
hitting the
ahead, Brent.
tweet, so I'll throw out the first question. It's kind of just like, so you've been doing like you have a laundry list of, and like saying that in a positive way, right? When went to your website, there is a list of novels that you have written. When did you settle on that as a career? How did you come about finding your way to being an author? Like, I'm curious of that, like pathway.
I came in through fan fiction. I've written so much fan fiction. I cannot emphasize that enough. But it was how I got into creative writing, and it was something that I wanted it to be good. I didn't just type something and put it out there, and it was not very good at first, but over a period of a decade and change, it improved and it got better, and I started experimenting with different voices and different things like that, and then I'd never been able to understand how anybody wrote a book. It was just like, how do you come up with that much? And then I had my first novel-length fanfic idea, and I was like, "Oh, it's that much. That's what that will feel like." And even though it was only fanfic, having finished that first one, and going, I have 90,000 words that has a plot and some subplots, and I'm happy with how this went. Like, okay, I sort of see how to do this, but it was still another couple years before I got into writing. As for making it a career, there was never any question that that would be what I would love to do, but whether I could do it seemed like a much bigger question mark. But basically, I kept my day job and worked for, I think, about 3 years. And once I had enough written. Oh, and I should go back and say, like, for the longest time, I thought, like, writing and having the job, no problem, no worries. Then it got to where I actually needed to get out and start promoting
Mm.
what I had written, and now there were 3 balls, and it was actually juggling, and I can't juggle. So, but when I finally knew that I could support myself for 2 years, um, with my writing, I said, "Okay, that's enough time. I will quit this job and I will see how it goes." And I have never known much more than 2 years out whether I can
Mm.
keep doing it, but the 2 years keep on rolling. So that's as much as you can ask.
So now,
Go ahead.
one more
Yeah.
follow up, because you said fanfic, and so all I'm in my brain is trying to figure out, like, you're in the Star Wars world, you've done some DC stuff. What exactly was your fan fiction like? What was the world or the genre that you were trying to, like, you were writing in that got you starting to do your short story stuff?
I mean, I got in at the beginning with the X-Files, and that was
Okay.
like, at the end of 1994, right when we were getting our
Okay.
AOL discs,
Oh yeah.
and the X-Files was still really new, and
Yeah.
that, of course, was the first fandom that primarily unfolded online.
Mulder and
And so we
Scully.
were
All
all
right.
making that up as we went. Since then, it would be easier to say what I had not written fanfic for. I wrote a
Okay.
lot. Weirdly, like Star Wars, DC, like these were not the things that I gravitated to as hard as some other things. Like I wrote way more in some obscure fandoms I will not identify, but there was a lot of Buffy and Angel back in the day.
Oh yeah.
There were some X-Men, other things.
Well, just because like the 50 Shades of, just knowing from my history, the 50 Shades of Grey author, that was essentially Twilight fan fiction that turned into the 50 Shades of Grey. It started from Twilight. So that was, I wasn't going to go into that depth, but like there's a lot of people that kind of, and I was just curious what
there's so
sparked
many
the interest. Yeah.
And it's actually kind of interesting because like the fanfic group, the fellow writers that I made friends with, etc., a surprising number of us are either authors or work in publishing now.
Yeah.
It was an interesting time to be doing that. So so that was cool.
Yeah. So
and there's so many more, like you hear about a few things like, oh, originally this was fanfic. So many things have some foot in that. So many things.
Gotcha.
Interesting. Brent, you and I probably fanfic. We probably would not do well at that, would we?
I can't keep a constant thought for like the fact that you can like fanfic a novel, man.
Right.
Like maybe 2 paragraphs I can try to get into, but like it's just awesome though. Yes.
I'm more of a
I think everybody in
person.
fandom understands the power of obsession.
Right.
If you're a big enough fan, like there are people it doesn't even matter what it is. Like for me, it was fanfic. There are people who've learned to cast stormtrooper armor.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
people who've tracked down the filming locations. There are people who build droids. It doesn't really matter what the thing is. If you're that much, there we go, beauty.
So it's kind of like a diorama. Like it's supposed to be Dathomir trees. So if you know the world of Dathomir. It's in the process of being built, so I know exactly what you mean when you get into it, and like it's my creative outlet.
Yeah, whatever your outlet is, you will find a way.
Well, and Brent is usually the guy who during our shows he'll be off to the side and he'll chime in, but he's over there building something, making something. I don't have the concentration to not just focus and talk. So I'll throw another question at you if that's okay. Obviously, we're a Star Wars podcast. I see you've done. You have other series, the Constellation, the Firebird, Spellcaster. Is it Evernight? Right. My handwriting's terrible. So you've got lots of things you're keeping yourself busy with, but you said you didn't gravitate first with fan fiction like towards Star Wars. When did your fandom of Star Wars, when did you become fan of Star Wars? Or are you a huge fan of Star Wars? Or is it more of I'm good at writing Star Wars and I'm an okay fan of Star Wars?
No, I'm a huge fan. I mean, I turned 7 the summer that it came out.
Okay.
So I was part of that core group of kids that just imprinted on it like little goslings, seeing the Mother Goose, it dominated, my childhood and early adolescence in a way. And I really think, for 25 years now, we haven't had what you'd call the monoculture anymore. There have been more than 3.5 television stations.
Right.
It used to be, even if you didn't like the number 1 song in the country, you knew it.
Right.
You would have heard it. That isn't necessarily the case anymore. And for Star Wars to be as dominant as it was at that time, like I kind of think younger people now maybe can't even comprehend like how much it was everywhere all the time.
Yeah, it was the culture at that time, right? It was, my wife and I always joke about the 70s were kind of a dark, dingy, blah kind of a decade, but then you had certain things like Star Wars that all of a sudden is like fandom came around it, society came around it, and it really changed from being that, oh, let's get over Watergate and Vietnam to, we've got this to look into now. So, I mean,
we've got Star Wars and disco. Everybody cheer up.
That's right.
And of course, there is the Star Wars disco theme mix. That
we use that in part of our intro. Yes.
I didn't even think about that being disco, but absolutely it is. Oh my gosh. Wow,
you.
you just blew my mind on that one. Thank you very much. But before we get into more like hardcore Star Wars, like so you have all of those different genres that you're writing. And my guess is that you are writing like you'll write a Star Wars book and then you'll write one of your other series which is a fantasy. So how long does it take you to create like from start to finish of a book to create the world and then write it, or is it just like this inspiration where you just sit down and knock out a book real quick, like from
I
start to
wish.
stop from start to stop, and then how do you switch between the genres or the different worlds that you are creating?
Um, how long it takes, it varies a little bit. Some books are harder than other books. Do you have a deadline or not? That
Okay,
tends
right.
to matter. Star Wars tends to want its stuff in a hurry.
Okay.
So, it's better, it's more planned ahead now than it was at the very beginning when I came in. I mean, literally, I was thinking about this earlier today when I got the email asking about what would be Lost Stars, my first Star Wars book.
Mhm.
My agent at the time and I, we literally thought they had mistyped the year on the due date. Like, they told me this year. Well, no, they must be that. No, they meant this year. So,
No.
that's what they meant. No,
Lovely.
I am somebody who outlines and plans, and I always have been, and that is to the good because, of course, when you work with Star Wars or any other sort of existing intellectual property, you need to be able to hand in an outline for them to
Mhm.
give you some sense of it. But, it depends. Outlining for me generally, sometimes that is the part that takes the longest. I don't consider outlining not writing. It is writing. It's just
Mhm.
I'm working out the story and the beats and the theme and sort of how this works before I get in and work on the prose of each paragraph and, the exact pacing of the scenes.
Are
Um
you given like a pitch paragraph to kind of create the world around, or are you like, hey, we want a book, you create it, like, or is there something that like, so I guess when I go to paint stuff, I go online and I find pictures for inspiration. I don't paint
mhm,
exactly the same way, but I go and find inspiration stuff. Are you when it's a new book? So let's because Lost Stars is one of the ones I know we want to talk in depth about a little bit. So when they came to you with Lost Stars, or when they come to you with one of your fantasy books, are you given like this is what we want,
mhm.
create around it, or are you just like, hey, this is your world, give us something?
Original work is all me. I go to the publisher with that.
Okay.
I tell them what I'm thinking, and if they like this, great, and we proceed from there.
Okay.
Um, you know, with Star Wars, I was actually very surprised because I thought at first, like, oh, they'll give me an outline and tell me what to write, and cool, I'll do it once. It's Star Wars. This is going to be great. And that was not it at all. They were like, "We want 2 childhood friends who wind up on opposite sides of this war, but retain the bond, and we want this angry guy who's in the Empire and this idealistic girl in the Rebellion." And I said, "I wanna switch it. I want the idealistic girl in the Empire and the angry guy in the Rebellion." And they were like, "Okay." And then I wrote an outline, and they liked that. The only thing they've given me really more than, like, a two-line prompt for was Bloodline, and that was because it had to lead into The Force Awakens, to some degree. It wound up leading into some stuff that didn't wind up in The Force Awakens, so I have people who are like, "Who did that bombing?" And I'm like, "No idea, they told me to put a bombing in there." I still got to come up with a lot of it. It was very strictly political at that time.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And I say this as somebody who really loved a lot of the old EU, now Legends, and spent so much of my money that could have been in my IRA on it, you know? But a lot of times Leia kind of got stuck doing the boring thing. She'd
Mhm.
be there
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
doing the political stuff while everybody else did whatever. And so they gave me this thing that just had political stuff. And I was like, right, I'm going to do all this, but can I swear on the show?
Yes,
Yes.
go for it. It's after
I
dark. We're
literally
good.
came back and said, like, "I'm gonna do all this, but also she's gotta blow shit up." And they're like, "Okay." I mean, come on, this is Leia. Like, she the person we see on screen is a person who likes to be in the thick of it.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And that actually leads right into a question I was going to have, because
Okay.
I mean, I we're much more audiobook people than reading people, both
Okay.
Brent and I. So, but we've gone through your books. Um, but I kept, between Bloodline and Leia, I was like, this really, Leia must mean a little bit more something to Claudia, right? Like, it seems like she's a character now. Knowing that you grew up the same time I did, I can see why. That's one
Mhm.
reason. But it just felt like there was a bond between you and Leia in your writing and in the choices you made. Would you say that started when you were that 7-year-old, and what led you to want to write these books about Leia?
First of all, thank you for saying that. That's lovely to know that it feels that way. I mean, yes, of course, she was huge to me, and she was huge to that entire generation of girls. Sort of the idea that Star Wars was for boys did not take shape until farther down the line. Everybody was going to those
Yeah. Oh,
movies.
yeah.
Everybody was doing this. Um, my brother and I would both get the action figures for Christmas,
Mhm.
so we could, between the two of us get a really good collection together. One time
Did
he
either one of you
traded
get
my
the
Lando Calrissian for a Hoth Ranger, and he still hasn't lived it down. The Hoth Ranger, Lando. Anyway,
No.
but yeah, I mean, and this was also a time, of course, when you had many fewer female genre role models in terms of people who actually like went out and did stuff. That was it was so much rarer then. You basically had her and Linda Carter's Wonder Woman,
Mm.
you know, and uh Leia was such a dynamic figure and funny,
Mhm.
and she had dimensions to her that you could really, really attach yourself to. So yeah, I like to joke like that, just as a fan, I've spent my whole life going like, what would Leia do? And then finally somebody was like, we will pay you to ask the same question. Here you go. I was like,
That's
yes.
awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Go ahead, Brent.
So I'll jump into the Lost Stars, because that was one, like, so prior to getting on, we just wanted to talk through the ones. That one, I think, for any Star Wars fan, is a must listen to, must read. It's a must get. It was fantastic. And I love what you just shared, the fact that they kind of gave you a little bit of the beats. Did they
Mhm.
want it to be set within the original trilogy timelines?
Yeah, they wanted the original trilogy timeline, and that, and they were like, you can use some of the big events. I mean, obviously, if you're anywhere in the galaxy and Alderaan is blown up, that is information that
Right.
you are going to be privy to. And at first, when I had in the outline, they're like, okay, but we don't need quite as many touch points with the original trilogy. I said, fine, changed it, wrote the book. And then when they saw the whole book, they're like, oh, wait, no, put those back. They hadn't quite
Understood.
figured
Right.
how
Yeah.
different it
Yeah.
would look outlined a book,
Right.
because in the book you're spending more time with the characters,
Hmm.
with the people that they know, in their thoughts, in their actions. So those events where you have, Thane running into Mon Mothma or speaking to Wedge, or
Hmm.
my personal favorite was Ciena having to go pick up Darth Vader, because that had bothered me ever
Yes.
since I understood that TIE fighters didn't have hyperspace capacity. I was like, somebody had to go pick him up. Like, how embarrassing was that? If you're Lord Vader, you have to be like, I need a ride.
Or just him on, like, so just him
Mhm,
walking past her, like, so you always saw the
mhm.
people down below when you're watching the show. You always
Mhm.
Yeah.
saw him looking out the window of the bridge, and you saw the workers down below. But then to have her walk up and be like, and then have him walk past her, and just
Mhm.
the feeling of ominousness that they were feeling as those workers
Yeah.
when he was around, like,
Mhm.
that choice was fantastic. And we were talking about it. I think one of my favorite parts of it was the fact that Ciena was watching the holo of the Hoth battle, because she
Mhm.
wasn't there. She was trying to figure out how they lost, and
Mhm.
she saw the flight maneuver, and she was like, "That's him."
Mhm.
And it makes sense because you've spent so much time with him, and they grew up, and it made sense that she could pinpoint that was him flying in that plane or in that speeder or wherever he was at.
Mhm.
So that was one of my favorite pieces of that. And my guess is like, how do you work that in? Like, how do you come up with that?
I mean, that was fun. I mean, flying and being pilots, that's one of the core things that ties Thane and Cyanide together.
Mhm.
Mhm.
He's going to help her learn to fly. He's rich and she's not. He has simulators that she doesn't. That's how they begin spending time together, and that's at the root of everything. There's that big thing when they're at the academy and the speeder
Mhm.
bikes link up. But because they know so well how each other fly, they can
Right.
maneuver as two. So that's always there, both in the literal sense, because, that is how they get bonded together, but also, it means a lot of things metaphorically as well. And that felt right for her to have that instant click of that. It wasn't something like she could identify anybody else. I didn't want it to be some
Right.
sort of superpower of like, oh,
Yeah.
but just if you
No.
really had
It
spent so much of your flying time co-piloting with one person and there's something distinctive that they do, and you see that, and she already knows that he's left the the Imperial Navy in a state of pretty severe discontent. So, that's sort of how that comes in. But it was really fun, like building them and building their planet, Jellican.
Mhm.
Mhm.
um, that really wound up being the basis for so much of it, because I feel like Jellican and what happens to that planet, you just sort of see that one planet kind of get a little bit more beat down and a little more beat down, because I
Right.
thought it was important to see that, and having them be rooted in that place
Mhm.
and having their stories connect to it in that way. Does this make sense? Am I
Mhm.
babbling now? I'm not
No,
sure.
no.
No, no,
Okay.
but yeah.
So I was looking at, and believe me, now that you've been talking, I'm like, oh, I need to ask this, I need to ask this, but I want to make sure I ask a few of the questions that we had kind of prepped and gotten ready for. Um, were you surprised at the success of Lost Stars? Were you surprised? Like, again, I'm 52, so why would a 52-year-old guy read a young adult novel or
Mhm.
whatever? But were you surprised that even people not of supposed the age it was made for in Star Wars or Lucasfilm's mind, that it was such a big hit with those, where some people say it's one of the best Star Wars books written in a long time, or especially during the Disney era? I mean, were
Mhm.
you kind of like, whoa, it hit that well? I mean, or did you know like this is going to be good?
There's not a simple sort of uh, answer to that. On the one hand, I had seen, and not very helpful people had shared with me, that there was a lot of posting before the book came out, like, I don't need any young adult in my Star Wars, and I'm thinking, like, I have some bad news for you about the movies, dude. Oh, they're all, or not all, but most of them are about young people leaving their comfort zone and taking on authority and responsibility for the first time, which is a very core, young adult theme. So that I wasn't worried about. I knew that anybody who gave it a fair shake, that it was going to feel like Star Wars,
Hmm.
you know. But on the other hand, I did not understand, and I don't understand how I didn't know this, because I read Star Wars books, but I didn't understand how many people read them. I
Right.
just didn't get it. I didn't have any sense of how much attention that could be,
Okay.
which actually was great. People were like, "Were you intimidated?" And it did not even occur to me to be intimidated. I was just like writing my fun story set in Star Wars. Oh, here we go. And that was it.
Awesome.
I knew that it was going well the week it came out, because at the time I was still on the brush fire known as X, um, now known as X. But when I was on there, I started getting tweets from people who were like, "How could you? How could you?" I think it was chapter 11. I could be remembering that wrong. Like, how could you do this? And that's where Alderaan gets blown up. And I was like, guys, I didn't do that. That was already there. But I knew that readers were experiencing it freshly, that they
Good,
felt it, even though it was
good.
familiar to them. I was like, okay, the book is hitting the way that I hoped it would hit. It's had a
Yeah,
longer afterlife than I ever dreamed, though.
actually, online right now, I just had somebody to ask me to ask you if there's any Lost Stars Part 2 coming out. I'm not gonna pin you down on that. I'm just letting you know the question's out there from people right now. So one of my favorite characters now, I'm an Obi-Wan guy.
Oh, I
I
love Obi-Wan.
in the original trilogy, I thought, okay, it's a good character, but obviously with the prequels, the Clone Wars, all that stuff, it's so much more depth now, right? So it's
Mhm.
really cool. But so Master and Apprentice, um, really just that was a book that I knew I wanted to read, right? I knew with Qui-Gon, with Obi-Wan, but Rael Averross in that book right there, I think one of the best written characters, just a great fresh look at things that probably threw people for a little bit just in the way he was. And Brent mentioned it, how I think it was Qui-Gon who said, you have to choose the light side, right? You have to,
Mhm.
you can't the dark side's really there. You can dip into it, but you have to choose to stay on the light side. But Rael, I thought, was a very well written character. How much feedback or how much love have you gotten for the Rael Averross character?
A lot, and actually that has surprised me to a degree. It came mostly out of the parts of the book that are set when Qui-Gon is the apprentice and Dooku is the
Mhm.
master,
Yep.
because I'd sort of had the idea longer ago, and I liked the idea that younger knights, like former Padawans of a master, would be natural mentors to
Love it.
following Padawans. It's a figure who could be like, "Hey, I understand him and how he is." It's somebody who's maybe a little bit closer, probably a little bit closer in age.
Right.
Somebody for them to be able to talk with. And I thought, where duty and everything allowed for that to happen, that would be a cool thing to see. And so I thought, well, that's exactly what I want sort of in Qui-Gon's past. And so that let him fit into the situation, that is comprised of the core of the
Sure.
story pretty well. But yeah, people have really responded to that. I think I was glad to be able to write somebody who didn't quite come into the Jedi Order in the conventional way, but didn't feel like I'm Anakin, but wearing a funny hat. That there were other ways that the Jedi Order had managed to get this wrong throughout the years. But it stood to reason to me that there would be occasional instances of that.
Sure.
And I thought the core thing with Dooku was that he's an iconoclast always, even when he is still very firmly in the light. He's not going to do things the way that you tell him they have to be done. He is going to do it his own way. And that could lead to him being supportive of, both Rael and Qui-Gon are very different from him, either as Jedi or,
Mhm.
of course, he becomes later. But he would support that because neither of them goes with the flow either. They're
Nope.
they
Love it.
do this their own way. Like, I
Love
mean, I'm sure it thrilled Dooku no end that Qui-Gon made Yoda, like, his last few little hairs fall out.
Frank, go right ahead. We were just
Oh,
talking a little bit about Master and Apprentice.
so since you brought up Master and Apprentice, I'm going to go to my favorite line. I'm going to wonder where
I
that came
just
from. So is that where did you just
I
bring it up
I brought it up, but go ahead and do it the right way. Yeah.
the right way? I can't remember the exact line, but it's probably one of my favorite lines that has been written. Again, like, so a couple of things, like, right, like that I
Mhm.
choose the light, right? It's like from Rail Aberoth is like that there's this swing, and like I guess yes, it was presented to me as like a 10-year-old kid watching Star Wars that there's that choice between light and dark, but it didn't really strike me until I heard it from your novel that were Rail. I don't know if it was Rail or if it was Qui-Gon. One of the two of them when they were talking at the very end of the book. It was just basically is like yes,
Mhm.
the difference is I know that there is a light and a dark, but I choose the light. I make a conscious
Mhm.
effort to choose the light. So like
Mhm.
that was just kind of where I didn't know, and I had to run out for a second, so I
No,
apologize.
you're good.
Okay. First of all, I apologize. The dog
Nope.
has found the squeaky toy.
You're
It's
you're
all
okay.
good. It's all good.
Peaches must if
We
We're not
are
gonna
a
yeah,
we are a shoestring
Yeah.
budget podcast of just a couple of guys that sit around. We have a little 5-year-old guest who's one of the greatest Star Wars fans we'll ever know that pops in every now and then.
fantastic.
One of our co-hosts has a 5-year-old that is Azalea is just precious and will pop in every now and then. So we have
Okay, all right.
we just like to
yeah,
sit
if you
around
hear-
and we're
If
all
you're
we're
good.
good.
speaking, that's what's going on. As for that talk, yeah, people really love that line, and I have to say that was actually something that literally just came out of that scene. And I think also a little bit like not really one of my main pet peeves, but one of my minor annoyances, minor league peeves in Star Wars is sort of the idea that Qui-Gon is a gray Jedi. And I'm like, he's a very unconventional Jedi. I don't think he's a gray Jedi in the sense that people talk about it being somebody who, taps into the dark side in some ways. Because, in that last fight, the Duel of the Fates, and everybody's separated by these force fields for a minute, Qui-Gon drops and meditates in the middle of that, where even Obi-Wan, who proceeds to spend the next 40 years of his life going through hell nonstop, and yet never even comes close to turning to darkness. Even he is pacing, and he's
Right.
he's got that energy. He can't calm down. Qui-Gon is able to center himself that quickly, and I'm like, that is not somebody who's pulling on anger, fear, aggression for their fuel. That is not who that is. So I wanted to have him have sort of that statement in that to just sort of, because that's the way that I see him. And I thought it was important to clarify that because he does things differently, it doesn't mean that he's farther from the light side of the Force. In fact, I would argue that by the time of the prequels, Qui-Gon is one of the few Jedi who is still very much in touch with the mystical side of the Force, in 100%. The way that the Order has kind of lost its way a little bit. I mean, does Yoda say one wise thing in the prequels?
He does a lot of questions. He asks a lot of questions. I know that.
I mean, and I think that's why
none these Clone Wars have. Let just use that army, buddy. No problems there.
I think that's why people see and that's the fall of the Jedi, right? So I think you can call that whole era the fall of the Jedi, and I think that's why people gravitate towards Qui-Gon. But I think Obi-Wan, to go just a further detail, I think Obi-Wan is probably one of the quintessential Jedis as well. Because look at all the crap. Look at all of that crap that man has gone through, and he was still able to choose the light through all of the crap that he went through, right? So
absolutely, I think Obi-Wan's less of a mystic, but not in a bad way,
right?
That's the kind of Jedi he would have been at any point.
He's very much a real. He's got a lot of realism in him, right?
Yeah. Obi-Wan is there, when the boots hit the ground. Obi-Wan is there and ready to deal. And I just think that's who he is. But, I feel like having had that experience with Qui-Gon is part of why he is as centered and as strong as he is.
We mentioned briefly earlier Bloodline, and I will say you talked about how it kind of led to The Force Awakens. It had some things in there that I would say people who want to see some of that more tie-in. I'm one of those people. I love, Brett and I were talking about before you hopped on, I love connectivity, right? I want to see a thread start here, and it might go like this, but I want to see it end up at the other place. And that book has that connectivity in there to where, that end, if you read that book and see that end, you see where some things are going, and Leia foresees those things coming. And I think two things. One, for me, I thought Senator Ransom Casterfo, another great character that you wrote. I love that character, even though he's kind of the bad guy and the one pushing Leia's buttons and everything. But the other thing that stood out to me is I saw somebody write this the other day, that Ben Solo finds out about Darth Vader / Anakin being his grandfather during the time frame of Bloodline, because he's off with
Mhm.
Luke, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And Leia's like, well, he's going to find out because he's out there, and when he comes out of hyperspace or wherever he is, and we can communicate with him, right? Like
Mhm.
he's going to know it. And so to think that the Ben / Grandpa Darth Vader and the end with the Resistance all were in that book. I think
Mhm.
people really need to pay more attention to that book to where it leads over to that.
Mhm. I'm sorry, the dog is now like, she wants the food, she wants it right now.
Understood. We're actually
Yeah,
gonna.
I'm sorry. So I'm
I,
like, I am listening to you, but also there's just this, like 11 pounds of pure rage,
no. We
right
only
here.
got you for a short time, so I know we're gonna close
Okay.
it up. But I want to make
No,
sure
no, no,
we
no,
talk
no,
about
no,
that.
no.
So
I
Uh,
got. Oh, go. I
yeah,
was sorry. I was gonna throw two questions because we've said a bunch of names. Are those your names? Do you come up with the names for like Rhea Labaroth and Thane Kyrell and Ciena
mhm.
Ree? Are those out of Claudia Gray's mind, or are those out of like Lucasfilm?
They're almost always me.
Okay.
The one big exception to that was Ransom Casterfoe.
okay,
Just with the name Casterfoe and spelled with a K. He actually came from the hold on, the dog is hold on, I'm trying to get her so that she's not gonna like actually climb on my head in the middle of all this. But
you're okay.
um Casterfoe, he came from George Lucas's sort of proto treatments for episode
Okay,
7. And in that, he was somebody who worked for Leia. He worked for her. He was on her staff, but he has this secret collection of imperial artifacts that he like, goes and
Mm-hmm.
strokes,
Mm-hmm.
whatever in
Mm-hmm.
his spare time, and then he betrays her and everything falls apart. And these stories had not been developed a whole lot, and I have to believe that that would not have stayed that way because one, Leia's been involved in underground resistant movements most of her life, and if she weren't
yep.
fairly adept at knowing who to trust, she doesn't even live until A New Hope. I was like, I kind of don't buy that. Uh, but I thought about it some more, and it was like, okay, well, let's make him the open opponent, but he's the opponent who has a point. He's the one she can't bat away as easily. And that got good because one of the conditions for Bloodline, they said there's no Luke, there's no Han, there's no Ben, at the end. And that was for all the best reasons,
Sure.
like I said before, sometimes Leia kind of got stuck with the boring bit. And they really wanted her to have her own showcase that focused on her, and I got that. But one of the events they had was like, and the galaxy finds out Darth Vader's her father. They find out from Casterfile. And I said, okay, and you're telling me they weren't telling me a whole lot about The Force Awakens, but they did tell me, that Han and Leia had split up. I was like, but they're still together at this point. And they said, yes. I said, okay, if that's true, I don't care where he is or what he's doing. Han's going to come to her. That is not negotiable. Please believe me when I say I can have him show up in this book and be there for her without it turning into Han Solo's latest adventure with supporting character Leia. And they trusted me with that. And I felt like it did come out that way, which was great. But because of that, still, Han's not in a lot of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And even though Leia is, a very independent person and she has so much of her own things to do, as a human being, if you are a parent without your child, a married person without your spouse, a sibling without your sibling, you feel that lack. You feel where those people ought to be. And so Casterfoe, I got to weave in elements that were a little bit like Luke and Han and Ben in some ways, so that he fit in this weird position. She
Right.
might have given him a little bit more hell. She gives him plenty, but she might have given him more if it weren't for the fact that she kind of needs somebody to talk about deeper philosophical things with, like Luke, or being a bit of a mentor to a younger person who's still a little rash reminds her of when Ben is with her,
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that he just drives her crazy sometimes, that there you have Han Solo. And she likes being driven crazy sometimes. So she kind of needs that. But and then with his first name, he didn't have a first name. It was just Castropho. I said, "Can we please spell it with a C? It looks better." And they said, "Sure." And with his first name, it was literally just, again, like it attached all the different men in her life. And I was like, okay, her dad was Bail Organa, so Bail Ransom. We threw an L in to make it Star Wars.
Nice. I like that. I like that. Well,
Sorry,
I
that was
know.
kind of a long.
No, it was fantastic. That's exactly what we wanted. I know we were kind of on a limited clock tonight, and then for our listeners, I've been Brent and I. You've already got me. I'm in Star Wars mode. Ben, Brent and I have been going for a little bit here. Brent, ask away a question, but we'll get tied up here real soon and finish things up. Go right ahead.
It's one that I forgot to ask yesterday. It's the one that I ask everybody.
Oh yes.
So you are you've written the Star Wars world. So this is a question that came out of people hating on my guy Count Dooku. So you got to hear a little bit of the backstory, and it's the question that I ask all of the people we have on for the first time. So it's kind of my shtick. I wasn't on, and they were talking about Count. They were going to Galaxy's Edge and looking at the sabers, and Count Dooku had a curved saber hilt, the saber hilts, because you can make your own at Galaxy's Edge. And some of the guys were on and like, oh no, who would want to Count Dooku's? It's curved. It looks like it's bent. And who wants Count Dooku's? No one was looking at Count Dooku. And then they talked about like him losing his hands and his head because they nicknamed him Stumpy. And I came on the next time and I was like, you know what? I actually like it because it's different, right? So the question arose out of the books that you've written about Star Wars, about your fandom of Star Wars. Is there a specific lightsaber hilt that you've enjoyed describing, or that you feel drawn to as a person, kind of as like a personality trait towards the lightsaber hilt of different Jedi?
Not hugely. I'm not. My fandom doesn't focus much on. I'm like a blaster, and in the notes, I'm like, Pablo, please tell me what blaster. A ship, Pablo. Tell me what ship, etc. I will say I really love some of the ones that we've designed for the High Republic. Not we designed, but that were designed for the High Republic. Stellan's lightsaber in particular.
Is that the one with like the blades on like
yeah, and it has because we wanted there to be sort of an Arthurian kind of feel to some of it. And I feel like we managed to capture that without losing it really feeling like a lightsaber. And again, I say we, like I had jack all to do with that. The designers did it, but I love that is what came out of it. I think it looks fantastic.
And
awesome. Absolutely awesome. And I apologize. We would ask you more on the High Republic, but we've read some of them, but we have not jumped all the way in yet. And
Listen,
I
have no
apologize.
idea how anybody's kept up. I'm not. I certainly don't know how we've kept up writing it.
I was going to say, you've churned out like what, 6 or 7 novels in the series at this point? Like
there's a lot.
For the High Republic, there's plenty. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm working on my third
Okay.
and probably final novel for the High Republic. I hope to write more Star Wars after that, but I'm like, I miss the rest of the galaxy. Can I go see the rest of the galaxy? So hopefully that's what would happen next. But it's all there waiting for you whenever you are ready.
That's right. We can tap into it whenever we need to. I will hit you with a last question, then we'll tie things up. So being that we're very similar on age, the thing that really rekindled my love for Star Wars was the Timothy Zahn trilogy that came out in the early 90s. Did it have much of an effect on you? Did you find much in it that brought you like, gosh, Star Wars has been kind of quiet for a while. This kind of lit the candle again, or did it mean as much to you as it did maybe others?
Oh, I absolutely loved it. I wouldn't say necessarily lit the candle again. Like for me, I guess the kind of fan that I am, like in my head, I just kept making up stories. I wasn't involved with fanfic yet, probably, thank God. But I loved imagining it. It is. I finally quit playing with the action figures after a point, but I had that big posters, a thing that used to be a thing of Luke and Leia about to swing off the sail barge in Return of the Jedi, that was up in my room,
Awesome.
all through my adolescence. So that still felt very present to me. And one of the role-playing games I know was already out because
the West Coast
West
game, I
West
think.
Indies.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I played with some friends
Okay.
with that. Not super dedicated. I don't have years of campaigns to go back. Yes.
Yeah.
And talk about, but so I don't know that it was a reigniting thing, but I loved the books.
Okay.
Obviously, it's actually super embarrassing because I go to events and I'm on a panel with Tim Zahn and I have to act real cool. And I'm like, hey, Tim, and I'm like, I really think he's a little bit unnerved. I can't blame him.
We did the same. We did the same thing to him at a convention. We all walked up and we were all like, "Whoa!" And he was just like, "Okay, all right." No, he was great.
He's a lovely, lovely person, and it is not his fault that I completely am not cool, but I am not.
So,
But
no, you're very cool.
or
Very
then
cool.
again, those kept me in the fandom, so maybe it is Tim's fault I'm not cool.
See, there we
Maybe I
go.
would have been so cool, but for that, I doubt it.
So where can fans, followers, and listeners of our show track you down? Whether it's social media, whether it's website, whether whatever's going on. And is there anything you want to promote that's coming out soon, or anything you're working on that you can talk about? Because we know you can't always talk about things. Anything you can that you want to promote to go along with that?
Sure. I'm not very active on most social media anymore, but if you go to my website, claudiagray.com, that's Gray with an A, you can tap into the social media accounts that are still open. And my assistant, it's not that fancy. She works for a whole lot of people, but she keeps that up to date with releases, interviews, appearances, etc. I also have a newsletter that you could sign up for at the website that I'm super overdue to write another issue of, but that will be happening shortly.
Okay.
So that works. And as for what's next, my next book releases in June, and that is the third book in my Jane Austen Agatha Christie mashup series. It's called The Perils of Lady Catherine de Bourgh. I had more fun writing this than I can possibly say. So that'll be out in, I believe, mid-June. And then in July, I have tie-in work that isn't Star Wars. The X-Files Perihelion will be coming out.
Okay. Good. I can't thank you enough. I'm sorry about the confusion.
I'm sorry. I
No.
was so good. I waited. Like I really thought I was on it, and I was not.
No, it's no big deal. One, you've been fantastic. I know we bombarded you with a ton of questions, but you've given us so much great information. Brent, I know you've had a great time. We love your books. We will jump into those High Republic ones when we get time. But thanks again so much. And Sarah, I think is this your sister's name? She's been great to work with. She's got some emails for me because I was like, hey, is Claudia coming? It's past the time and you're here. So it doesn't matter. Tell her I apologize. But thank you again for coming. We will reach out to you again. Hopefully our paths will cross at some convention or something like that coming up. So thank you.
Okay, here's hoping.
You got it.
All right, thank you guys. This was fun.
Thank you. So Star Wars fans, Rule the Galaxy fans, thanks. We'll be back next week with, author John Jackson Miller, who wrote The Living Force. We'll be talking to him about that new book. So it's been great. All these authors and all this Star Wars tie-in. Thanks again. Until next week, may the Force be with you.
This is the way.